So, what does a whispered comment have in common with a physical assault? Well, in the eyes of India's new criminal law, the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita 2023, it's actually more than you might think. Today, we're going to break down the key offenses against women, and we're going to cut right through the legal jargon to give you a really clear understanding of how this new law protects dignity, defines consent, and prosecutes crime. All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the absolute foundation of these laws, this idea of a woman's dignity. From there, we'll build up, looking at a whole ladder of offenses that are all based on intent. We'll also check out some really fascinating court cases that helped shape these laws. Then we'll get into the modern two-part definition of rape, and we'll wrap it all up with the single most important piece of this puzzle: consent. Okay, first things first. At the very heart of all these laws is one central idea: protecting a woman's dignity. And it's so important to get this. In a legal context, dignity isn't just some vague moral concept. Nope, it's a precise legal term, and it has very real-world consequences. So when the law talks about modesty, what does it actually mean? It's not about being shy or old-fashioned. A better way to think about it is like this. It's a kind of personal force field that every woman has from birth, something that protects her sexual self. And the whole point of these laws is to make sure that force field doesn't get violated. So if the main goal is to protect this force field of dignity, how does the law actually do it? Well, it sets up a whole spectrum of offenses, where each one is designed to tackle a different level of violation. We're going to look at 3 of them. And what makes them different isn't just the action itself, but the specific intention that was behind it. You know, it really just boils down to 2 simple things. What did the person do, and what was going through their head when they did it? Was their goal just to insult, or was it to physically outrage, or even more seriously, to forcibly disrobe someone? Each of those intentions carries a very different weight in the eyes of the law. This slide does a great job of laying out what you could call a ladder of severity. You see the actus reus, which is just a fancy legal term for the physical act, and the mens rea, which means the mental state or the intent. So, at the bottom rung, you have Section 79, using words or gestures just to insult. Take a step up, Section 74, now we're talking about physical force with the intent to outrage. And at the very top, Section 76, using force with the really severe intent to disrobe. And notice how the punishment climbs right along with the severity of the intent. Okay, but intent can be a really tricky thing to prove, right? So let's put it to the test with a real-world kind of scenario. So, what's the final call? Well, the law is all about the perpetrator's goal. In scenario A, the men were just talking to each other. Their goal wasn't for her to hear it. So legally, no crime. But in scenario B, their clear intention was to target her with the insult. And it literally doesn't matter if she had headphones on and heard nothing. The crime was committed the second they acted with that specific intent. Now, these laws weren't just thought up in some quiet room. They were really forged in the fire of actual court cases. And each one of those cases added another layer of meaning and clarity to the law as we know it today. I mean, take the case of State of Punjab versus Major Singh. This one brought a truly gut-wrenching question to the court. Can the modesty of a baby, someone who doesn't even have the words to understand what dignity is, can that legally be outraged? And the court's answer was a powerful, resounding yes. This case set a massive precedent. The crime is all about the perpetrator's actions and their intentions. It has nothing to do with the victim's age, their awareness, or how they react. The court basically said modesty is something a woman carries with her from the moment she's born. Then there was the Rupin Dale Bajaj case, which absolutely sent shockwaves through the highest levels of Indian society. You had a high-ranking police officer inappropriately touching a senior civil servant at a party, and a lower court just dismissed it as a trivial little thing. But the Supreme Court completely disagreed. They sent a loud and clear message. Unwanted physical contact that violates a woman's dignity is a serious offense, and it doesn't matter who you are or where you are. Okay, so moving from insults and assaults, we now turn to the most serious offense, rape, which is defined in Section 63 of the BNS. The modern definition is kind of like a 2-part equation. For the crime of rape to happen, you need a specific act plus a specific circumstance. Let's start with the act itself. Back in 2013, after a huge public outcry, the legal definition of the act of rape got a massive update. It's not just about penile vaginal intercourse anymore. It now includes these 4 distinct categories, which cover penetration by any object or any body part, manipulation to cause penetration, and even oral application. It's a much broader and frankly more realistic understanding of what sexual assault actually is. But here's the crucial part. An act of penetration by itself is not enough to be considered rape under the law. It absolutely has to be paired with one of 7 specific circumstances. And you know what all 7 of these have in common? They all center around one thing: the complete lack of free and valid consent. You can think of this slide as the legal checklist for rape. If an act of penetration happens under any one of these 7 conditions, it is, by law, rape, period. This covers the obvious stuff, like using force, but it also covers more subtle situations, like getting consent through a lie, or when a person is just legally incapable of consenting, maybe because of their age, or because they're intoxicated, or even unconscious. Every point here closes a potential loophole and makes it super clear that real consent has to be freely and consciously given. Let's just zoom in on that fear of death or hurt point for a second, because this is another place where the law got a lot smarter. The threat doesn't have to be against the woman herself. If she gives consent because the perpetrator threatens to harm a family member, her partner, or literally anyone she cares about, that consent is invalid. It doesn't count, and the act is still rape. So we've climbed that ladder of offenses, we've looked at landmark cases, and we've unpacked the whole 2-part definition of rape. But after all that, what's the golden thread? What's the one big idea that ties all of this together? Well, it all comes back to a single word: consent. And on this point, the law is absolutely crystal clear. Consent has to be an active, unambiguous, and voluntary yes. It has to be an enthusiastic agreement to a specific sexual act. Let me be really clear. Silence is not consent. Passivity is not consent. And not protesting is definitely not consent. And this right here, this is a hugely important protection. It legally recognizes that in a moment of absolute terror, a person might freeze. They might not fight back. They might not scream. And the law says that the absence of a physical struggle can never be twisted into an excuse, and it can never be misinterpreted as consent. The burden is on the person initiating the act to get a clear yes, not on the victim to physically fight back. Look, understanding these laws is the first crucial step. They give us a much clearer framework for justice. But the real challenge, the ultimate test, is bridging the gap between the words written in a law book and the reality people face every day. How do we, as a society, make sure that these clear laws actually lead to a safer, more just world for everyone? Now, that's a question that can't be answered by lawyers alone.